From George Ivanovich Gurdjieff's All and Everything. Third book, chapter 40. Beelzebub tells how people learned and again forgot about the fundamental cosmic law of Heptaparaparshinokh. After Beelzebub had listened to what was communicated in the Litu Chandbros handed to him, his grandson Hasian again turned to him and said, "My dear and kind grandfather, please help me to clear up for myself one contradiction which I do not understand and which does not accord with my logical confrontations. When you began your elucidations about the holy planet Purgatory, you enjoined me to try to take in everything you spoke about, without missing anything. And you also enjoined me constantly to maintain the intensive tension of my active mentation, so that corresponding data for the formation of the notion relating to every question, explaining the details of both primordial, fundamental, sacred cosmic laws, should be completely crystallized in me. I did try during all your elucidations to do so, and it seems to me I cleared up so much for myself about these cosmic laws that I could perhaps even freely explain them to someone else. In any case, I can already very well represent to myself the sacred law of Triamazakamno, with the particularities of all three of its sacred independent forces, and cognize it for my personal essence quite satisfactorily. But as regards the sacred law of Heptaparaparshinokh, then, although I have not yet fully cleared up to my reason certain of its, in my opinion, unimportant details, nevertheless I hope that with a little more active pondering, I shall understand them as well. Now, however, after I had, while trying to assimilate well these sacred laws, clearly sensed, and I became aware that they are very complicated and in general difficult for a complete understanding, it suddenly greatly astonished me and continues to astonish and interest me how the three-brained beings who arise and exist on the planet Earth could not only understand these sacred cosmic laws, but could even have constated them among the surrounding cosmic results. Because from all your tales about them, I got the full impression that since the second Transapoleon perturbation there, when each of the newly arising results of theirs becomes a responsible being, he becomes, thanks to the abnormal prevailing Osciano, the possessor of only automatic reason, and that it is impossible to understand both of these sacred cosmic laws with such a reason. I became convinced with the whole of my essence when I myself tried to understand them. Having said this, Hasian looked questioningly and eagerly at his beloved grandfather. Having thought a little, Beelzebub began to speak as follows. "All right, my dear boy, I shall try to elucidate to you also about this natural perplexity which justly arises within you. It seems to me, I already once told you that although from the period you mentioned on that planet, almost all the three-brained beings there became, thanks to the abnormally established conditions of ordinary being existence, possessors of only an automatic reason. Nevertheless, it does sometimes happen there that certain of them by chance escape this common fate, and that instead of that automatic reason, which has become usual there, a genuine objective being reason is formed in certain of them, as it is in all three-centered beings of our great megalocosmos. Although such exceptions, especially during recent centuries, are very rare there, yet, I repeat, they nevertheless do occur. In order that you may approximately represent to yourself and understand just how such exceptions may occur among them, you must first of all know that, in spite of the fact that from the time when all the consequences of the properties of the organ Kundabuffer began to be crystallized in them, it became proper to them to have automatic reason during their responsible existence, Yet nevertheless, always and up to the present time, at the arising and the beginning of the formation of each one of them, there is always in their presence the germs of all possibilities for the crystallization, during their completing formation into responsible beings, of corresponding being data, which later, during responsible existence, could serve for the engendering and functioning of objective reason, which should be in the common presences of three-brained beings of all natures and of all external forms, and which in itself is nothing else but, so to say, the representative of the very essence of divinity. There, in the objective sense, extreme misfortune about that which you yourself already perplexedly, instinctively suspect, as I discern from the formulation of your question, especially from your having mentioned Oskiano, consists just in this, that they, having indeed at their arising such possibilities in themselves, immediately fall from the very first days after the separation from their mother's womb, only thanks to the abnormalities established in the process of ordinary being existence of beings around them who have already reached responsible age, under the stubborn influence of that maleficent means, invented by them themselves for themselves, which, as I already told you, represents in itself a something of the kind of Oskiano which they call education. And in consequence, in this way, all possibilities for the free formation of all that which is required for the engendering of objective being reason is gradually atrophied, and finally disappears in these unfortunate, so to say, still innocent in everything, newly arising beings during the period of their what is called preparatory age, and as a result, when these newly arising beings later become responsible beings, they, in their, so to say, essence, center of gravity, become the possessors not of that objective reason which they ought to have, but of that strange totality of automatically perceived, artificial, even deceptive impressions, which, having nothing in common with the localization of their spiritualized being parts, nevertheless acquires a connection with the separate functionings of their common presence. In consequence of this, not only the whole process of their existence flows automatically, but also almost the whole process of the functioning of their planetary body becomes dependent only on chance, automatically perceived external impressions. In very rare cases, certain of these favorites of yours, who have reached responsible age, become possessors of genuine pure reason, proper to three-brained, responsible beings. This usually proceeds thus. For instance, it happens that immediately after the separation from his mother's womb, one of the newly arising beings finds himself, for the process of his subsequent formation, among such surrounding conditions, where for some reason or other all kinds of those abnormalities with which the entire process of the external being existence of three-brained beings breeding on this ill-fated planet is already overfilled, do not touch him and do not influence him automatically maleficently. And in consequence of this, the germs which are in him for the possibilities of acquiring pure reason have not the time during the process of his subsequent formation to become atrophied to the very root. And further, it sometimes also happens that for the subsequent completing formation of such a three-brained being there, newly arisen in the said relatively normal conditions, his responsible guide during his preparatory age for responsible existence is such a three-brained being as had before this, also of course by chance, already been completely formed in the same way, and in the functioning of whose waking consciousness, thanks to the frequent actualization in his presence of being part dog duty, there had participated the data which had remained whole in his subconscious, for the engendering of the divine impulse of conscience. And so, this same guide, being aware with the whole of his being of the important significance of this responsibility taken upon himself in relation to this new being who has, in the said manner, only as yet reached his preparatory age, begins according to conscience impartially to create for his Oskiano every kind of what are called inner and outer factors for the perceiving of corresponding impressions, in order to crystallize in his common presence all those data, the totality of which alone can give to the three-brained being who has reached responsible age the power to be Zvoli Brunonian, or as your favorites there on earth would say, the potency not to be identified with and not to be affected by externals through one's inevitably inherent passions. And this being impulse, engendered in the being with these data, can alone help him to acquire the possibility of a free and impartial constatation of all true phenomena appearing in the cosmic results around him. Here it is very opportune to repeat once again that on most planets of our megalocosmos, on which three-brained beings arise and exist, there is an oft-repeated sentence formulated in the following words: Our common Father Endlessness is only the maker of a three-centered being. The genuine creator, however, of his essence, during the period of his preparatory existence, is his Oskianotsner, namely, he whom your favorites call tutor or teacher. And so, even during the last century, it occasionally happened there that such a one from among your favorites who had already reached responsible age, completely formed and prepared in the said manner for external perceptions, constating by chance a certain law conformable, particularity, among the cosmic results around him, began to study it in detail and from every aspect, and having ultimately attained, after long persevering labors, to some objective truth or other, initiated other beings around him and similar to him into this truth. Now, my boy, listen to how these peculiar three-brained beings first became aware of this fundamental cosmic law of the sacred Heptaparaparshinokh, and how the totality arose there of all the information concerning its various details, thoroughly cognized by previous beings, and which had become, after having been transmitted from generation to generation, the possession of every subsequent three-brained being of this planet of yours, which could enable them to cognize this information also. And likewise, listen to what and when, thanks to always the same strangeness of their psyche, there resulted from all this. I wish to explain to you about this in even as great detail as possible, with all the sequence of the historical course of development, both as regards the constatation of the cognizance concerning this sacred law, as well as the gradual forgetting about it, because such information relating to all this will greatly help you, first of all, to elucidate those, as you expressed it, unimportant details of this sacred law, which you have not yet completely transubstantiated in your reason. And secondly, thanks to these elucidations of mine, you will likewise learn that among the number of your favorites, even the contemporary ones, such responsible beings do occasionally appear in the sphere of genuine learned beings. And assuming that the other three-brained beings there existed more or less normally, then, thanks to the impartial and modest conscious efforts of these beings, genuine objective learning might arise and gradually develop also on this ill-fated planet, as a result of which that welfare might be obtained also for them, which the three-brained beings of all the other planets of our great megalocosmos have long ago deservedly enjoyed. In the beginning, during the period when the three-brained beings of that planet had in themselves the organ Kundabuffer, it was, of course, out of the question that the beings of the earth could have learned about any cosmic truths. But afterwards, when the functioning of this maleficent organ, which they had in their presences, was destroyed, and when in consequence their psyche became free and became, so to say, their own and individual, it was just from then on that all kinds of stories began concerning their relatively sane being mentation. The perceiving and cognizing of the fundamental cosmic law of the sacred Heptaparaparshinokh by the common presences of these three-brained beings who have taken your fancy began for the first time on the continent Atlantis, at that period when, do you remember, I already told you, certain beings there understood by themselves that something not quite right proceeded in them, and when they themselves discovered that they had certain possibilities of being able to destroy this something not quite right, and of becoming such as they ought to be. It was just at that period of the flow of time when certain of them began to observe those, according to sane being mentation, abnormal functionings which proceeded in their common presences, and to search out the causes of these abnormalities, and to try to find every kind of possibility for removing them from themselves. And when many branches of real science there had reached a high degree of development, that among the number of those who were seriously interested in this, as it was then called, most necessary functioning of reason, there was that terrestrial three-brained being by name, Theophany, who was the first to lay a rational foundation for the subsequent development of this branch of genuine science. As I later chanced to learn, this same Theophany was once pouring a certain mixture onto a marble slab to dry, consisting of the extract of the plant then called patatok, pine resin, and cream of the milk of the then famous what were called Kenyonian goats, so that after its hardening a mastic should be obtained, used for chewing after eating. When for the first time he noticed that in whatever way and in whatever quantity this mixture was poured onto the marble slab, it always concentrating in the same way, assumed after the final cooling a form composed of 7 definite plane surfaces. This fact, unexpectedly constated by this Theophany, greatly astonished him, and the intensive wish arose in his common presence to elucidate to his reason the radical causes of this law conformableness, still unknown to him, and therefore from that time on he began to repeat the same thing, but already with a conscious aim. Shortly after, still at the beginning of the investigations which Theophany undertook, his friends, other learned beings of that time, with whom he shared the beginnings of his various elucidatory experiments on his constatations, having become interested in this, also participated in these further researches of his. Well then, after long and detailed researches, this group of learned three-brained beings of your planet first became aware and categorically convinced that almost all the cosmic results observed around them, which are actualized in the course of their manifestness, in external, transitory states, perceived by the organs of beings in some or other definite form, always have 7 independent aspects. As a result of the conscious labors of these several learned three-brained beings of your planet, that branch of almost normal science then arose and began to grow on the continent Atlantis under the name of Taza Lorinono, the sense of which meant the 7-aspectness of every whole phenomenon. But when that continent perished and absolutely nothing survived from this branch of genuine science, then again, during the course of very many centuries, the beings of this planet knew nothing about this sacred cosmic law. Evidently, this branch of science on the continent Atlantis was so widely known that it was not found necessary to include anything about it in a legal monism, as was usually done, as I have already told you, by the learned beings of the continent Atlantis for all those notions, the knowledge of which they wished to transmit unchanged to beings of future generations. If a legal monism concerning this branch of science had also existed, then something or other would certainly have survived of this knowledge, as had survived of other knowledge attained by the beings of Atlantis, through those who were by chance saved after the loss of that continent. The knowledge concerning the sacred Heptaparaparshinokh was again known only after many, many of their centuries, thanks to two great terrestrial learned beings, the brothers Chun Kiltez and Chun Tropel, who later became saints and who are now on that holy planet Purgatory where we recently were. Do you remember I already told you that on the continent of Asia there was a country, Maralplessis, and that a king existed there by name Konuzion, a descendant of that learned member of the Society of Akodans, who had gone there from Atlantis for the observation of all kinds of natural phenomena of their planet. Just that same king who had invented for his subjects the wise tale, already mentioned by me, in order to save them from the pernicious habit of chewing the seeds of the flower Gulgulian. Well then, to the grandson of this king Konuzion, after the arising of an heir who later also became king over the beings of this group, there arose just these same two results of the male sex, twins, the elder of whom was called Chun Kiltez, and the younger Chun Tropel. The word Chun, then in the country Maralplessis, meant prince. Owing on the one hand to the fact that the environment of these two brothers, direct descendants of one of the chief members of the great learned society, happened to be arranged correspondingly for their preparatory age, and on the other hand that they themselves tried not to allow the atrophy of the hereditary inherency, which they, as in general, all newly arising three-brained beings of this planet have, to crystallize the data for engendering in them the power to actualize being part dog duty, and also in consequence of the fact that the affirming source of the causes of their arising, that is, their, as is called, father, decided to destine their responsible existence for the field of learning and took all corresponding measures for their preparation for this. Then, already from the very beginning of their responsible age, they almost became such as three-brained beings everywhere on the planets of our great megalocosmos become, who choose the same aim. That is to say, those who carry out all their studied researches not for the satisfaction of their, what are called, vainglorious, proud, and self-loving weaknesses, as is done by the beings there, particularly the contemporary ones who choose the same field for themselves, but for the attainment of a higher gradation of being. At the outset, they became, as is said there, learned specialists in medicine, and afterwards learned in general. The period of their preparatory age and the early years of their responsible existence were spent in the town Gob, in the country Maralplessis. But when this part of the surface of your planet began to be buried under sand, they were both among the number of those refugees who went east. This group of three-brained beings, refugees from the country Maralplessis, among whom were also these two twin brothers, later great learned beings, crossed the eastern heights of Maralplessis and then settled on the shores of a great water space. There was afterwards formed from them a settled group of these terrestrial three-brained beings still existing today, which, as well as the country which it inhabits, is now called China. Well then, in this new place of their permanent existence called China, these same two brothers were the first to constate and to cognize, after the loss of the continent Atlantis, the fundamental cosmic law of the sacred Heptaparaparshinokh. It is in the highest degree an interesting and curious circumstance that the initial source for this constatation of theirs was the totality of cosmic substances localized in just that same surplanetary formation, which is now called their Papa Varun, or as it is still called, Poppy. And owing to the implanting of the habit of chewing the seeds of the poppy, their great-grandfather, the great King Konuzion, first invented his, as already mentioned by me, religious teaching. They were evidently transmitted by inheritance to these two great terrestrial learned beings from their great-grandfather, the great King Konuzion, in addition to the ability of well considering and cognizing their being duty in relation to beings around them, similar to themselves, also an interest in and a passion for the study of this product, which has always been for your favorites one of the innumerable harmful means which have brought their psyche, already enfeebled without this, to its ultimate degeneracy. In order that you may better represent to yourself and well understand why just such a small planetary formation as I mentioned, named Papa Varun, or Poppy, was the cause of the constatation by these great terrestrial learned beings of that most great cosmic law, you must first of all know that on all planets, for the purposes of the transformation of common cosmic substances during the process of Iraniranumaj, there arise among all kinds of surplanetary and intraplanetary formations in general, as well as among formations called flora, in particular, 3 classes of formations. The formations belonging to the first class are called Unastralnian arisings. Those belonging to the second class, Octatralnian arisings, and those belonging to the third class, polar Medectian arisings. Through the Unastralnian arisings, there are transformed in their evolutionary or involutionary processes those cosmic crystallizations or active elements which obtain their arising only from the substances transformed by the planet itself, on which that kind of surplanetary or intraplanetary formation is formed for the purposes of the common cosmic Iraniranumaj. Through the Octatralnian arisings, there are transformed, besides what I have mentioned, also those active elements which obtain their primary arisings from the substances transformed by the sun itself and the other planets of the given solar system. And through the arisings of the third class, namely the polar Medectian, there are transformed, besides the first 2 classes, also all those active elements which primarily arise from the transformations of the substances of various cosmic concentrations belonging to other solar systems of our common megalocosmos. The surplanetary flora formation mentioned by me, named on your planet, the planet Papa Varun, belongs to the class of polar Medectian arisings, and through it there evolves or involves what is called the totality of the results of the transformation of all other cosmic gravity center concentrations which come into the atmosphere of this planet of yours through the common cosmic process of what is called ubiquitous diffusion of the radiations of all kinds of cosmic concentrations. Well then, my boy, after these 2 great terrestrial learned beings, Chunkiltes and Chuntropel, had more or less arranged the new place of their permanent existence in the then still quite young China, they began to continue the intentional actualization in their common presences of being part dog duty, interrupted through no fault of theirs, in the field of the profession chosen by them for their responsible existence, namely scientific research, in the branch called medicine. They then began to investigate that totality of cosmic substances which still before this your favorites had learned to obtain there from the mentioned polar Medectian plant, and which they named opium, which then denoted in the speech of the beings of that group, dream maker. These two great brothers then began to investigate this opium in consequence of the fact that they, as well as many other three-brained beings of that time, noticed that on the introduction into themselves of a certain species of this mass, every painful sensation temporarily disappeared. They first of all set out to elucidate the action of all its properties, in order perhaps to find a possibility, by means of one of its properties, to destroy or change for the better that special form of psychic illness which had then become very widely spread among the refugees around them, three-brained beings like themselves. During these researches of theirs, they first of all noticed that this same opium consists of 7 independent crystallizations with definite subjective properties. And on further and more detailed investigations, they definitely constated that each of these 7 independent crystallizations of this one whole consists in its turn of 7 others, also definite crystallizations, which their 7 independent subjective properties, and these, in their turn, again of 7, and so on, almost to infinity. This then so greatly astonished and interested them that they put aside all the problems they had previously set themselves, and from then on exclusively and perseveringly occupied themselves with the investigation of this fact which had astonished them, and which they had first constated, and ultimately attained to those results which both before, even at the period of the existence of the continent Atlantis, and at any other period later, were unprecedented for the three-brained beings of your planet. Many centuries after the period of the planetary existence of these terrestrial great learned beings, now the saints, Chun Kiltez and Chun Tropel, when I happened for one of my elucidations to become acquainted in detail with the history of their activities, it appeared that when they had become convinced beyond doubt that such a totality of cosmic substances as is named opium consists of a whole range of compounds with 7 diversely subjectively propertied active elements, they then began with the same aim to investigate many other cosmic results, or, as is said there, phenomena, which proceeded in their environment. But later, in these investigations of theirs, they confined themselves only to 3, namely, to this same opium, to what is called the white ray, and to what is called sound. Investigating the mentioned 3 diversely manifested results of cosmic processes, they then, among other things, categorically made clear and became convinced beyond any doubt that although all these 3 results, in respect of the causes of their arising and outer manifestations, have nothing in common with each other, yet their inner construction and functioning are nevertheless exactly alike down to the smallest detail. In brief, then, for the second time on your planet, in this still quite young China, after the loss of the continent Atlantis, these 2 twin brothers again constated and categorically made clear that all the separate, and by their exterior, independent phenomena, if each of them is taken as a unit, are, in the totality of their manifestations, again 7 secondary independent units, having their own subjective properties, that these secondary independent units in their turn consist of 7 tertiary units, and so on to infinity, and that in each of these primary, secondary, tertiary, etc. units, the processes of mutual relation and mutual influence proceed, equally in every detail, down to the smallest exactitudes, and with equal consequences. By the way, during their investigations, they then first defined with separate names the first 7 independent aspects taken by them of the whole result, as well as their secondary and tertiary derivatives. Namely, the first 7 fundamental aspects of each whole they called 1. Erti Pikan On, 2. Ori Pikan On, 3. Sami Pikan On, 4. Okti Pikan On, 5. Kuti Pikan On, 6. Epsi Pikan On, 7. Shvidi Pikan On. And the secondary, Erti Nura Chaka, Ori Nura Chaka, Sami Nura Chaku, Okti Nura Chaka, Kuti Nura Chaka, Epsi Nura Chaka, Shvidi Nura Chaku. And in order to distinguish to which of the 3 mentioned results of cosmic processes the given definition referred, they added after each of these definitions the following. For the definition of the nuances of sound, they, noting the number of their vibrations, always added to this the word alil. For the definition of the particularities of the composite of the white ray, they added the expression nar kra nura. And for the definition of the active elements of the polar Medectian product called opium, they added only the number of their, what is called, specific gravity. And to define specific vibration and specific gravity, these great terrestrial learned beings took as the standard unit the unit of vibrations of sound, then first called by them the Nirunosian world sound. I will explain to you a little later about the meaning of the definition Nirunosian world sound, first adopted by the then great learned beings of the earth. But meanwhile, for the clarity of the understanding of my subsequent elucidations of the given theme, you must also know that everywhere on the planets, genuine scientists take as the standard unit for their confrontative calculations of specific gravity and specific vibrations that part established by objective science of the most sacred Theomalogos, which still contains all the fullness of what is called the vivifyingness of all the 3 holy forces of the sacred Triamazakamno. But on your planet, genuine scientists, as well as those of new formation of all periods, took and until today still take as such a standard unit what is called the atom of hydrogen, for the same purpose, namely for the confrontative calculations of all those diversely propertied definite parts of some or other whole which had become known to them, as for instance, for the specific gravity of various active elements which had become known to them among the number which ought to be present in the spheres surrounding their existence, considering this atom of hydrogen, for some unknown reason, to be in general the smallest and also indivisible. It must not be overlooked that these sorry scientists from among your favorites do not even suspect that if this atom of hydrogen of theirs is indeed the smallest and indivisible, there in all spheres of their planet, then this does not mean that it cannot be broken up many times more within the limits of other solar systems, or even in the spheres of certain other planets of their own solar system. By the way, you should know that this same hydrogen of theirs is just one of those 7 cosmic substances which in their general totality actualize, specially for the given solar system, what is called the inner Anzapalnian octave, of cosmic substances, which independent octave in its turn is a 1/7 independent part of the fundamental common cosmic Anzapalnian octave. Such an inner independent Anzapalnian octave is likewise present in that solar system to which our dear Caritas belongs, and we call these 7 heterogeneous cosmic substances of different properties 1. Planakurab, which is just their hydrogen. 2. Alilonofarab. 3. Krilnomonifarab. 4. Talcoprafareb. 5. Kretofomanofarab. 6. Cereonurifarab. And 7. Klinanoizufarab. And on your planet, the genuine learned beings, at different periods, called by various names these same 7 relatively independent crystallizations of different properties, or according to their expression active elements, which compose the inner Anzapalnian octave of their own solar system, the contemporary, as they are called, learned chemists there, however, who are already learned of new formation of the first water, call them 1. Hydrogen, 2. Fluorine, 3. Chlorine, 4. Bromine, 5. Iodine. For the last 2 definite crystallizations, they have no names at all, because their names did not reach them from their ancestors, and at the present time they even do not suspect the existence on their planet of these 2 cosmic substances, although these 2 cosmic substances are the principal necessary factors for their own existence. These 2 latter cosmic substances, which might be quite tangible and quite accessible in all spheres of their planet, were still known only about 2 centuries ago among the scientific beings there, who were then called alchemists, but whom the contemporary comic scientists simply call occult charlatans, considering them to be only exploiters of human naivety, and were called by them Hydroumiac or Petrkarmak. And so, my boy, these great terrestrial learned beings, now saints, the twin brothers Chun Kiltez and Chun Tropel, were the first, after the loss of Atlantis, to lay anew the foundation of this knowledge. They not only laid anew the foundation of this totality of special information, but they were even the first there on earth who were constated 2 of the 3 chief law-conformable particularities present in that great law about which I have already spoken to you, and namely, they were the first to constate 2 of its mtnelins. They then called that branch of genuine knowledge, similar to that which on the continent of Atlantis was called the 7-aspectness of every whole phenomena, the law of ninefoldness, and they called it thus because they added to the 7 obvious different manifestations, called by them Dukzako, of this great law, these 2 particularities first constated by them and named by them Suanzo Turabiso, which name meant obligatory gap aspects of the unbroken flowing of the whole. And they named this law thus, chiefly because during their detailed researches they became convinced beyond all doubt that in all the cosmic transitory results they investigated, these particularities first constated by them, likewise obligatorily, always proceed in certain places of the process of this great law. These 2 great terrestrial Chinese learned beings then had recourse for their elucidatory experiments to every kind of what are called chemical, physical, and mechanical experiments, and they gradually formed one very complicated and in the highest degree edifying experimental apparatus, which they called Ala Atapan. By means of this apparatus, Ala Atapan, they then clearly proved to themselves and to others that in the very essence of all these 3 transitory results of cosmic processes, and namely in the polar Medectian product, called their opium, in the white ray, And in sound, there are the same properties, and namely, there are in all these three outwardly quite different cosmic phenomena precisely the same what are called actualizing constructions. That is to say, for their manifestations, there are in them precisely the same mutually acting law conformablenesses. And in all three of these outwardly different, apparently independent manifestations, the functioning of these mutually acting law conformablenesses have precisely the same action on each other as they have in their own manifestations. That is to say, the dukzako of any one result acts on the corresponding dukzako of another, precisely the same as it functions in that dukzako which is one of the 7 aspects of this whole cosmic result. This same apparatus, by means of which these great brothers made their elucidatory experiments, I saw with my own eyes many centuries after that period when they existed there, and I became very well acquainted with its construction. As the cause of my personal acquaintance with all the details of the construction and action of this remarkable experimental apparatus, ala Atapan, was due to accidental circumstances connected with my essence friend Gornahor Harhark. And as it will surely interest you very much, and at the same time will be exceedingly instructive for you, I shall describe it to you in somewhat greater detail.